Guys, how's it going? Welcome to this video. All right, we are going to do another no start video because everybody, well, pretty much everybody who has a car is gonna run into a no start at one point or another. All right, so you guys might as well understand what causes these no start. In particular, this video is about a no start with a failing alternator versus a no start versus a bad battery, and those two components are connected as far as the electrical system is concerned, also as far as the ignition system is concerned, more the battery than the alternator. But it's really important to know which one of the two is the issue. If you guys do not know anything about how a battery or an alternator contributes to the your vehicle's electric needs as far as starting is concerned. Okay, so we're gonna do a really simple analysis of what you would get if you get a no start with a bad battery versus a no start with a bad alternator. So basically, no starts with a bad battery is probably one of the most common causes of no starts in these situations. Basically, what happens is, obviously, if you have a dead battery, 99% of the time, you're going to get no power whatsoever. Now, there's another thing that could cause a situation where you get no power whatsoever, and that's the main fuse. But in a lot of these cases, it's the battery that's the problem. You get no power whatsoever. So when you press the push start, you put your key in, you get nothing, no sign, no sounds, nothing. You hear nothing, nothing comes on, nothing. It's as if you didn't have a battery in your vehicle. In some cases, if you guys have a weak battery, what happens is you might get some flickering sound, like click, 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 click. You might get those rapid firing sounds. And if you guys don't know what that is, that's essentially the solenoid on the starter going off, but it just doesn't have enough power to power the motor for it to crank. So you don't actually hear the cranking. Or in some cases, if the battery is weak, but not so weak that it doesn't start the starter motor, what happens is you get a slow crank. The crank isn't as strong. You get a slow crank. Now, obviously, if you guys had a situation of a bad battery before or a dead battery, 99% of the time, it's because you left your headlights on or there's some drain in your in your electrical system. Something like that, where your vehicle is sitting for maybe overnight or something like that, at least a couple hours, and when you try to start it, you have issues with it. All right, those are pretty much the instances where you have a bad battery. And on top of that, you could essentially, I don't know if it exists in the newest cars these days. It probably does, but most vehicles have the battery meter, and when you turn your vehicle on, it'll show you exactly where the battery health is, as far as how much charge is in the battery. Let's move on next to the alternator. Now, if you guys have a dead alternator, a bad alternator that causes no start, here's what happens. 99% of the time when you have a bad alternator, it's going to be on the road. You're going to be driving, or your car is going to be idling or something like that. Your engine's going to be on, but at some point it's just going to die out. And after it dies out, you're not going to have the ability to start your car. It's very rare that you have the alternator be completely dead after it's parked, and then you try to turn on, and then you have like no power whatsoever. Normally what happens is, if you have a bad alternator, the alternator isn't putting out any sufficient current to the battery, or it doesn't generate enough sufficient current to the battery. And what happens is you're going to end up driving on the battery until the battery's absolutely drained. And why that happens is because the alternator, even though the components are turning, the part of the alternator that actually transfers electricity has malfunctioned or been broken, and it doesn't transmit electricity from the alternator to the battery. Obviously, at that point, it's not charging the battery, and then when your engine dies out, it pretty much means that your battery has died out. Not that your alternator may have died out, maybe like a good 10-15 miles, maybe even shorter if you have a lot of electrical things connect to your vehicle, your headlights and everything. That also contributes to how long you can drive on the battery itself. Now, in that situation, when your vehicle dies, you're going to try to start it, and obviously you're not going to get anything. Sometimes if you have an alternator that's kind of on the weekend, it pushes out a certain amount of current, but not enough to actually charge the battery sufficiently. You might be able to turn your vehicle on, and you might be able to see lights on the dash or something like that. But in most cases, what's going to happen is when your alternator dies out, there's going to be no electricity in the car whatsoever, because your battery is completely drained, and you were driving on your battery for a good many miles. Well, for a few miles anyway. So basically, in that case, when you try to turn it on, what happens is you're going to have no power, and it's going to be completely dead. Now, here's the test for the alternator. So when you put the what happens in these cases, I've seen a lot of people in these cases, even on the highways, most of the time on the highways where they have the cars front to front, and they're trying to charge up the battery because they don't know anything about mechanically, they don't know anything about how the alternator works, because charging up the battery, you're going to take 4 to 5 hours to charge up the battery. Most of the time, they're trying to just start the car and thinking that once they start the car, it's going to drive. But for the most part, you can put cables on the battery trying to turn on. It'll start up. And the reason why it'll start up is it's running off the battery off your other car. Once you take the cable off, your vehicle just dies out, and you're not going to be able to crank it up again. It's going to be completely dead again. In that case, you know that it's the alternator, because normally what happens is, if it's a dead battery, you put cables on the battery, you turn your vehicle on, take the cables off, your vehicle is going to keep on running, because the alternator is actually keeping the electrical current within your vehicle. It's putting power into any of the components of the vehicle that needs electricity. Now, if the alternator is dead, most of the time, if the alternator is dead, your battery is pretty much dead too. All right, and once you put cables on the battery, turn the car on, it's gonna turn on. I'm repeating myself, but it's important, because once you turn the car on, your car's gonna turn on. Once you take the cables off, your car is just gonna die. All right, and that's when you know that it's the alternator that's the problem. And you could test out the alternator essentially. Well, basically, that's pretty much the test for the alternator. You can actually take the alternator out and take it to AutoZone and have them test it. They do those tests too, but that test will suffice as far as giving you an answer to whether your alternator is good or not. Now, a lot of people, what they'll do is they'll put in a brand new battery, turn the car on, and thinking they resolve the issue in those instances where the alternator is actually the problem. Now, a lot of people in these situations don't know how the electrical system works as far as the alternator is concerned. You might be able to start your vehicle up. You might be able to drive your vehicle for maybe like 10-15 miles. maybe shorter. You have your radio on, your headlights on, your AC on, all those things on. It's going to drain a lot of electricity from your battery. At some point, your vehicle is going to die with a dead battery because it's been running on the battery. The alternator, with a dead alternator, it's not going to be pushing any kind of current into the battery. So the alternator is not, it's not working. So those are the two differences as far as no starts with either the alternator or the battery, and those are the easiest ways to know, especially if your vehicle dies while the engine is running, your vehicle dies while you're driving. 99% of the time, 100% of the time, 99% of the time, it's probably your alternator that's the problem. And once you try to start it, it's not going to start because the battery is dead. The alternator, it hasn't been charging up the battery. So just keep that in mind. If you guys have any questions, definitely if you guys have any questions, leave a comment in the comment section. Please subscribe. Please give me a thumbs up. Appreciate your time, all right, guys. Take care.